Hello viewers, welcome to History in Lowell. I'm Maritza Grooms. I'm here with my buddy, Professor Robert Forrant, and we have Emma Tobin of the International Institute. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you.
And I think you've been with us before, maybe one of our very early episodes.
Yes.
Yeah, way to make it back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, we generally don't bring people back.
Oh, wow. I'm honored.
Yes.
I mean, and I've heard now I'm on an award-winning television show, so I'm especially honored.
Yes,
Award-winning channel.
Well, we do what we can, you know? So lots of celebrations going on. You just finally wrapped up the 100-year celebration for International Institute. Kudos to you guys.
Thank
you. It was an awesome event, by the way.
Thank
I
you
got
so
to go
much.
thanks to Bob and got to bring some young people.
I think a lot of thanks for that event go to Bob, actually. It was really amazing to have him as part of the planning
I'm not
and
100
research.
years old, by the way. Let's just clarify that.
We feel like we're 100 years old now that we did it. But
Doing all of the work that you all did, though, bringing all that information together, all those people, 100 people, making an impact. And that just goes to show the kind of impact that immigrants have right here in Lowell. So I think that'll be a
Oh,
good...
what a segue.
Right?
yeah, good one.
That's good.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the impact that
Sure.
immigrants, refugees, all kinds of people are having in Lowell, and in large part thanks to the International Institute, right?
Sure, yeah. So, well, you know, just to back up a teeny bit, I'll say that the International Institute, we're a 100-year-old organization, which is why we were celebrating our centennial, and we were founded right here in Lowell. So when we talk about folks that have arrived in Lowell either because of the International Institute or who have really been able to kind of establish themselves here with the International Institute support, it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, the Institute has been formally or officially resettling refugees here for a couple of decades now. The 1980 Refugee Act marked the beginning of what is the refugee resettlement program, or what it looks like today, or what it's looked like for a long time, but maybe we'll talk about those changes in a bit. And typically, kind of at our peak, the Institute was resettling upwards of 250 people a year in Lowell itself. We have sites in Boston and Manchester, New Hampshire as well. So just in Lowell, those 275 people were arriving on planes from all over the world. Our staff were picking them up at the airport and bringing them to their first apartments in the U.S., which were furnished and set up and ready with food and other home goods, and helping them kind of take those early steps towards integrating into this community. So enrolling kids in school, getting access to health care, finding initial jobs, participating in English classes and cultural orientation. And from there, people just, take these basic supports and run with them. They become hard-working members of the community. They open businesses. They go on to earn degrees. They send their kids to school to earn degrees. And it's an indisputable fact that Massachusetts and New England more broadly would be in pretty serious trouble if we didn't have immigrants and refugees specifically coming here to join our communities. So we're really proud of the work that we do, but more so we're really amazed by and inspired by the people who come through our services.
Yeah, that's definitely really inspiring. I think about all the stories that we've told over now 2 years, almost 3 years that we've been doing this show, of immigrants, anybody coming from anywhere outside of the U.S., coming here to resettle and start their lives all over again, and how, people really don't understand how difficult that really is to completely change your life, and who knows what you're leaving behind, right? Because most of these people are not leaving just because, I just want a bright sunny future in America. They're coming here for all kinds of really traumatic reasons, and for them to start over and contribute to the community in such a beautiful way. I think that we know even some of these people, and maybe a couple of them have been on the show too. But I think that the immigrant story, the refugee story, the asylee story is probably the most impactful and inspiring American dream story that there really is.
Yeah, I agree. And there are these different categories, right? There are refugees, there are asylum seekers, there are asylees, there are immigrants of all kinds of statuses. And clearly there are legal definitions around these and what makes one person one thing and not another. But in so many cases, the lines are blurry, and people have experienced different kinds of push and pull factors that have inspired them or pressured them to leave a place or encouraged them to come to another. And in the case of people arriving through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and through the International Institute, these are individuals who have been found through a legal process to have a well-founded fear of persecution. They are outside of their home country and they are unable or unwilling to return to their home country as a result of that well-founded fear of persecution. Even more specifically, that persecution needs to be because of an individual's race, nationality, religion, political opinion, or membership in a certain type of social group. These days, that is used to apply to individuals being persecuted for sexual orientation or gender identity reasons. So it's a really specific group of people who are arriving and who have experienced some pretty oftentimes terrible and targeted persecution and trauma.
And people would have been, for the most part, as I understand it anyway, a lot of the people that would come to Lowell or Manchester, New Hampshire, or Boston, or Chicago, wherever people go, could have been in one of these refugee resettlements outside their country for a considerable period of time. Absolutely,
sometimes decades. I mean, we resettle families that have many young children who have never been to their country of origin. So, a Congolese child who was born in Kenya or Tanzania, or a Burmese child or child from Myanmar born in Thailand. So people can spend 5, 10, 15, 20 years in a refugee camp, essentially awaiting some type of solution and what the United Nations would call a durable solution. So they've identified sort of several things that can happen for the long term for refugees. Ultimately, they would love to see all refugees repatriate or return home if things in their country become safe or stable. Short of that, they would like to see people integrate locally. So person is displaced from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Kenya and somehow integrates into Kenyan society. And then if that's not a possibility, resettlement becomes the next step. So people often think, oh, refugees, they're displaced and then they resettle. But in reality, a very small percentage of the world's refugees actually resettle. I think it's somewhere around 1%. Wow. And refugees are just 1% of the world's total displaced population. People can be displaced and actually not qualify as refugees. Maybe they're fleeing climate change. Where they live, doesn't have enough water to grow food anymore, or it's flooding. Maybe they're fleeing general violence, but they are not being persecuted. So there are reasons people can be forcibly displaced, not qualify as refugees, and therefore not even have the opportunity to apply for that status and potentially be resettled.
Right, and then it seems like based on what you're describing, that's where we get into some of the more interesting problems now, where somebody fleeing potentially gang violence in El Salvador or something like that is trying to get out, and the more complicated and the more difficult the system becomes, and in this case we're talking about the United States, then the more likely it is that desperate people will do equally desperate things to try to be safe and to try to have their kids be safe. And I think that the escalation of tensions, let's say now on the Mexico border and whatnot, are inspired by the tightening of restrictions on people coming. If you make it more difficult for people to come, but the conditions, this is me thinking anyway, the more difficult you make it, and the conditions that promote people fleeing escalate still further, people don't have any option. Because again, people are damned if they do, damned if they don't. If somebody stayed in harm's way, we would think, how curious. What a weird person. And then if they flee, we also think, how curious. Now it's what an unlawful person. And we've put these weird strictures around this without understanding, again, I think the larger immigration history, why people fled to Lowell from Eastern Europe in 1910 or whatever it is, and we lack the empathy to figure out what's happening now.
And I think we also, there's this kind of global phenomenon where if you look at the wealthier countries in the world who do have refugee resettlement programs, so countries in Europe, Canada, Australia, the US, you see that there are folks who arrive through an official resettlement program, right? They're scheduled to arrive, the United Nations is involved, they get off an airplane, they're placed in a certain type of program. So people like the majority of people who come through the Institute in Lowell are coming through that type of program. When you have individuals who are trying to get into a country, they're showing up at the border and they're saying, I'm desperate, I'm unsafe, there's nothing to say that they're less desperate or less unsafe than these other individuals. But I think oftentimes governments develop narratives that these are sort of line jumpers. These people didn't wait their turn. They didn't go through the due process. But, these processes and who has access to them, it's political, right? I mean, I'm never comfortable making comparisons about who's in a worse situation. But if you're fleeing violence or persecution and you don't have access to that system, that's pretty challenging. What else are you going to do besides show up at the border?
Right. And I think it even harkens back to our last episode when we were talking about the philosophy of it all, right? The values that are attached to these things and who's making these policies and why is it harder for some than it is for others. Right. But speaking of how hard it is, let's talk about these pathways. Like how difficult is it? So you're in wherever you are, and then you get resettled into maybe a refugee camp. How do you make it from there to here? So, the first step, people often don't get resettled into a refugee camp. They're fleeing oftentimes in a moment. A terrible thing is happening and it's time to run away. Leaving everything behind.
Everything, potentially, including family members. Some people flee more than once. You run away, you think it's safe to go back 3 days later, you stay, 6 months later, you run away again. So when people wind up in camps or in sort of informal settlements of refugees, it's often in a serious state of crisis. At that point, people's pathways to resettlement or not can look really different depending on the country that they've fled to, whether or not that country has signed on to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees sort of convention around refugees, or whether that country kind of handles it independently. It's different in different contexts. But people go through a years-long process of refugee status determination in which they have to tell their story again and again.
So re-traumatizing themselves.
Re-traumatizing and being checked for every fact in detail to make sure you are telling it the same way. And should a person be determined to be a refugee, there's then a years-long process of screening. Refugees are arguably the most highly vetted immigrants in the world. They go through so many screenings and background and security checks, medical checks, and there are so many things that could cause a person to not qualify for resettlement. So by the time a person reaches the point when he or she is resettling, they are well known by the country that they are going to be resettling to. The thing that is so terrifying in this moment is that the federal administration has determined that the number of refugees they are proposing to resettle in the United States for this current fiscal year, which started yesterday, has been reduced to 18,000. This is it had reached 110,000 under Obama, so this is an all-time low since the birth of the Refugee Act in 1980.
Can you say those numbers again?
Sure. So it had sort of, with some peaks and valleys, grown to 110,000 as the annual cap for refugees to be resettled throughout the country. Granted, we never actually resettled 110,000 people in a year, but we had the authority to. The government gave us the power to. Under the Trump administration, those numbers have shrunk for every year of his presidency, and the number he is proposing for this current federal fiscal year is 18,000.
Wow.
This number is not yet approved by Congress, and so the International Institute and our partners are strongly urging our local leaders to urge Congress to please increase this. This is people who have gone through that vetting process that I just described are ready and waiting to travel, to rejoin their families, and in the vast majority of cases to become contributing active members of their communities and economies. It's a humanitarian program, but you can't ignore the fact that these people contribute to local economies. And with this incredible shrinking of the program, so many of those people, their screenings, their background checks, all those things that are put in place will expire. It's not just that they won't be allowed to travel now, they'll have to go through these things again.
Wow. And these things can take up
years.
So many years. Yeah. And they, oh my goodness, I just can't get over those numbers. 10,000?
Down to
18,000.
Right.
Wow. People must be scrambling right now. Just
it's a very scary time.
Oh my goodness,
and
I can't even imagine.
As I've heard a couple people say, it's not just the number. 18,000 is terrifying, but there is some fine print that should not be ignored, and some other changes to the program, including the federal administration would like to give local authorities, local government, states and cities the power to refuse to resettle refugees within their jurisdiction, which luckily in Massachusetts and in Lowell, I feel confident that our local governments would not take that step.
Yeah. And I don't think Lowell would let it.
I don't think Lowell would let it. Yeah. So, but if that should happen, let's all rise up and not let Lowell. Let's let Lowell not let it.
Yes, we did asylum for fugitives from slavery in the South in the 1850s, so we should do what we can now and
We should do what we
keep
can now.
Lowell's progressive part of its history
Yeah.
alive, right? So so that I understand, you can go through this whole process, be vetted, have, in simple language for me to understand, a clean bill of health. You're okay to come to the United States or to France or to Germany or Australia or Canada or wherever it could be. But if that doesn't mean then you're free to go. That means you now go back into another line where you're waiting, if you will, you're not literally in a line, but you're sort of in a queue waiting to see what the numbers are going to be. And
Sure. People are prioritized sometimes differently. There will be certain priority countries or groups, or you could be prioritized for health or medical reasons. If if a person needs critical treatment that they're not going to receive where they are, they might travel faster. So the way it works on our end, we receive it's called an assurance request. It comes through our national agency, the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, which is based in D.C. And we review that case. We determine that yes, we can resettle that case in almost all instances, and then we wait for a travel notification. And sometimes that comes the next week, and sometimes it comes a year later. And so we just are constantly looking at that list of assured cases saying, well, there's this Congolese family of 8 who might arrive, and a Syrian family of 4, and this Burmese family of 7. I wonder if we should rent this apartment. We don't know how many people are coming. We don't know when they're coming. And so it's a very, very intense program to implement. And when you find out people are coming, it's go time. You get out there and you find a place for them to live, and you start to set it up.
All hands on deck.
All hands on deck. Drop what you're doing. It's time to move some couches.
get to the airport.
Get to the airport. Yeah, exactly. And people are literally our clients travel to Manchester, New Hampshire, and they have usually flown through JFK, so they're stepping foot on the U.S. soil for the second time in their lives, and many times. Some of our clients speak English, many of them don't, and they're getting off the airplane, with packets of information, and they're just looking for, maybe they've seen our logo before, they're looking for someone that looks kind of friendly and is waving them over, and that's it.
That must be the exciting part of your job, though. Like the happier part, once everybody's in a home, and now they maybe they have to look for work or school, but once you can see their faces in their home, kind of, that must be like a really great part to your job.
It's an amazing. It's hard to even put words behind it. It's beautiful to see people arrive here. I do think there are kind of layers and levels of integration, and people experience it kind of in waves. And I can't speak to it personally because I did not immigrate to the United States. But what I experienced through refugee and immigrant colleagues and friends and clients is, there's the initial arrival where you feel like I've made it, and then there's some reality setting in of, oh my gosh, there are a lot of things that I'm going to have to figure out and do, and there's culture shock.
There's winter.
There's winter. You only have sandals. There's some things that go on. Speaking of that, we need coats and boots right now. So if anyone listening wants to bring us coats and boots,
coats and boots,
scarves, hats, snowsuits.
Yes. We know New England winters can be very fickle.
They can. So I think people experience some kind of emotional setbacks along the way when they realize, in the case of refugees, qualifying for resettlement, arriving here is a huge step, but there's there are more steps to
still
take.
Just kind of the beginning.
You still, in many cases, have to learn a new language. You have to learn a new system of employment. You have to learn how to function in your job. There's just so much still to do.
Even
and
just
there are time limits, right, built into, there's a certain amount of financial help to get people established, but by certain points you're supposed to be working and somewhat self-sufficient, right?
You are, yeah, and there are different programs that people can enroll in. I won't bore your listeners with the specific details. There's sort of rapid self-sufficiency programs, as the government calls them, and then there's longer-term, slower programs for people that might need more support. But essentially, people, the mandate of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program is for refugees to achieve economic self-sufficiency, so to be able to pay their own bills. There have been changes, the new public charge issue, which some people may have heard of, where you can now be penalized for accessing public benefits as an immigrant to this country. It's a terrible thing. We stand against it at the International Institute. Luckily, it does not impact refugees, so the refugees can still access public benefits as part of that pathway to self-sufficiency.
It's probably coming, though.
Well, yeah, I'm afraid to say it, but you never know. You never know what's coming.
You really never know. Let's talk about something pleasant.
Sure. I'm sorry, I'm such a downer.
No, but the situation itself is like so big and so heavy for so many people. But there are success stories, and there are those stories that once people get on their feet, they contribute in a major way. And I think Lowell really tells a great story of, people coming in, being resettled, and then contributing in a major way, going back to school, their kids go back to school. And I think we have community leaders who are great examples of that, who came through the International Institute. You want to tell us any success story that you can think of?
Sure, yeah. Well, so the International Institute, we are finishing up the first year of I still think of it as our brand new program, but I guess it's not anymore. We have a certified nursing assistant training program. It's called CNA to Success. And we are working with English language learners, not even immigrants. We've had folks born in the U.S., a couple of them go through this program because they were English language learners. And it trains those individuals to in the certified nursing assistant sort of technical and medical skills, and then also in English for the medical field and in sort of soft skills for the medical workplace. And we're about to launch our third class, our third cohort, and the people going through this program, I mean, I'll probably cry talking about it. They make me so emotional. These are especially the individuals who came through the resettlement program just because we've known them since they arrived in the U.S., people who may have come here, not speaking any English, not having necessarily had any type of formal job, and then sort of identifying as they go, I think I'd maybe like to pursue a career in healthcare, and learning enough English to make it into the program, because not anyone can join. You have to demonstrate that sort of intermediate proficiency. And joining the program and working so hard and going on to become CNAs. These are folks who've maybe been in the United States for a couple of years and as adults have learned a new language well enough to gain enough medical knowledge to provide medical care to, my grandparents who are there around. So, I mean, it is a really beautiful thing to watch someone take all of those steps in order to get there. And becoming a CNA it's a pathway. Folks can go on to, to become an RN, and a lot of the people coming through our program say that they want to do that. They want to become nurses, and it's just very, very inspiring.
I think that's beautiful. People coming here and still just wanting to give back in some way and going through all of this work. I can't even imagine. I technically should be also a Spanish speaker, but it's not the easiest for me, and I can't imagine being put somewhere where they only speak Spanish, and this is me as a person coming with a little bit of Spanish speaking knowledge, and then and within 2 years getting a job in a medical field. Like, that's just not even a thing I can imagine for myself. And I'd say I'm a pretty smart cookie.
You're a very smart cookie.
But like,
at least pretty smart.
At least, But, and then you hear so much rhetoric about people who don't speak English here, and that America is a English-only country, which it's not. It never has been. And to hear these kinds of stories, I just don't understand where the disconnect is. How can people not be inspired? Because even like watching you light up and talk about it, I was getting emotional. I
feel the same way. How could you not be inspired? How could you not be amazed by a person who who speaks all of these languages, has all of these different types of life experience, and wants to be part of your community and contribute
and just keep making it better.
Keep making it better. Yeah, I mean, we had, so I'll share at the graduation of the last group of CNA students, we offer the program with various partners in the community, and one of them is Duval Life and Wellness. It's an elder care facility, and their director of nursing, he's retiring in several years. He's worked with CNAs and nurses throughout his whole career, and he said, this is the strongest group of CNA students I've ever encountered. Wow. Their professionalism, their dedication to care of others, it just was, it blew him away. And I thought, you know, here are people again who, not all of them have experienced persecution, but some of them have, and all of them have experienced immigrating to this country, and they're just showing up with this tremendous respect for and care for these other individuals who are experiencing, who are marginalized too, older people in a nursing facility. So it's really quite amazing.
I mean, I had a student at the university last semester when I was teaching immigration history. I got to know her because I was asking the students to tell their stories, and she actually didn't know the story deeply until she started asking her parents questions. One had fled Vietnam, the other one had fled Cambodia, and they were both in two different refugee camps. They didn't know each other, and they ended up being, with refugee status, they ended up in California. And then, again, they still don't know each other. They end up in Lynn, and they meet, and they get married. And then they come to Lowell, and this student in my class, once I got talking with her, it turns out she and her 3 sisters are all students at UMass Law. And it's like, okay, right, so that kind of a story, right? And she's very modest and shy about it, and you know, did say, I'm glad that I actually dug in more to find out. But I think on the surface, we just have this, we look at somebody and say, that's who they are, right? And we don't get to see what you're describing, or somebody doesn't get to see the student sitting in front of me in that class. And I just, same way, I just sit there, like, I don't get this. Like, how is this possible? And what did those parents go through individually, and then end up in Lynn, then end up in Lowell, and now your daughter is sitting in front of me, thank you, in my class, right? And it's like this, and the sort of animosity and lack of understanding of that journey, just sometimes I don't get it.
You know, as I've said, our clients and our students inspire us. Another group of people who I personally am incredibly inspired by are the International Institute's staff, the people who actually provide these direct services, who are themselves, many of them, refugees and immigrants, or former refugees and immigrants. So, you know, the people I have the honor to work with are from Somalia and Haiti and Liberia and Uganda and Afghanistan, and and Guatemala, and you know, individuals born here who have devoted their lives to this work. And it's just, you know, especially for those people, especially for the couple of people on my team who came through the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program, and now this is their life's work, this is their mission. I mean, it's beautiful.
And oh man, I am getting emotional, because that is beautiful, and that's what we want, you know. We want people, and that's who's coming here, right? The people who are gonna make this a better place for all of us, and who are doing that kind of work to make it better for those who are coming after them. And I think the really great side of Lowell does that. We connect each other, we connect other people to other things, resources, and the International Institute is just an incredible place. And thank you so much for your work, Emma. Thank you for coming here today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness. And then even like the collaboration between groups like this, right? This amazing history professor and this amazing organization.
I have the easy part.
I think it's really amazing what you do, and I think it's important to acknowledge the resiliency of spirit, and I think that's what we all need right now. So thank you so much for bringing that on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
It's a pleasure.
And thanks, Bob, as
My
always.
pleasure. I love this show.
And thank you all for tuning in. Hope you learned something today. Coats and boots. We need them. International Institute. Thank you.